Hey retro gamers, today we head back to the year 1993 and travel the world to collect the 6 mystic statues in Illusion of Gaia for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. I'm Eddie Inzauto, and this is Smashing Bricks. Hey, welcome to Smashing Bricks, a retro gaming podcast, a show about revisiting classic video games together to see if they hold up to the rose tint of nostalgia. This is episode 53. I'm your host, Eddie Inzauto, and today I'm joined by returning guest, Jake Ciarapica. Hey, Jake, how's it going?
It's going awesome. Thanks for having me on again, man.
No problem. And we're doing a game that came out in literally the same year as the first game that we did together and published by the same publisher,
Which is so
partially.
funny.
It is. It is. And they're similar yet quite different games, which will be fun to think about. We don't have to do any of the preamble like we did last time, unless there's anything you want to tell people about. This is your chance.
No, I don't think so. I mean, like I could wax eloquently about whatever book I've recently been reading, but this is a video gaming podcast, right?
Right. Okay. So with that, let's just get right to it. We're talking about but Illusion of Gaia, which is a Super Nintendo game released on November 27th, 1993 in Japan, a year almost, 10 months later, September 26th, 1994 in North America, and then June 21st, 1995 in EU or PAL regions. It was developed by Quintet. Quintet is notorious among internet gamers, and we'll talk about that in a second. And it was published by Enix in Japan and then picked up by Nintendo for publishing in other regions. It is an action adventure with RPG elements, though most places call it an RPG. You and I spoke about this very briefly, and I think you're on the same page as me with that label.
Yeah, I'd actually totally agree. I was surprised how not RPG, like particularly for this era, this game was. It reminded me a lot more of like a Legend of Zelda like title than, I don't know, other RPGs, even action RPGs from the era.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it looks like a Zelda too. It's got that same top-down view most of the time. Sometimes you do a little bit of side-scrolling view in certain areas. You're often in those kind of like quote unquote dungeon areas, and otherwise you have time to roam around towns. There isn't a lot in between that, but when you're actually playing the game, it's more like action based combat. You press a button, you swing the sword, you fight enemies that are on screen. There's no switching from overworld to battle in the traditional RPG sense. And you don't have really any stats or anything. You have a health bar, enemies have health bars. Very much an action adventure game with some RPG elements that we'll talk about later. But that's basically what it is. It's a narrative focused game, so it's told through dialogue, first person narration, and third person narration. There's actually a narrator at times in this game, which I love, and it's focused on that, but that comes sort of incrementally and maybe haphazardly. Some could say, and we'll get to that. But yeah, it's a story driven game, and that might be why people want to call it an RPG. It has a lot of those moments where you see your characters just dialoguing back and forth, standing in one place. And I don't know, maybe that's what people call an RPG.
And you have
Anyway,
stats, right? Like your characters have stats that
you have
increase
three
as the game
stats.
goes on.
Yeah. You have health, attack power, and defense power.
Right.
So you have quote unquote stats.
Sort of,
Uh,
right. Much like I'd
yeah.
say there's sort of a story here.
I think, well, that's interesting. We'll get to that a little
Yeah,
bit
yeah,
more
yeah,
later.
yeah.
Did you, it sounds like you have not had any prior experience with this game. Is that right?
No, this was my first time trying it.
Okay. Now, have you played any other quintet games?
I don't believe so. If I have, it's been very briefly without me really knowing.
Okay. Yeah, so for anyone who doesn't know, the quintet games were ActRaiser and ActRaiser 2, and then there was sort of a trilogy, an unofficial trilogy, although this one seems to be very much a sequel to the first game, Soul Blazer, because we'll mention a couple things later that indicate that. Then there was this one, Illusion of Gaia, and then the last one, Terranigma, which was not released in the US, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
That sounds right. But no, I haven't played any of those, like going through that those titles. I've heard a lot more about Terranigma, but both Soul Blazer and Illusion of Gaia pop up on a lot of like must try hidden gems or like games you didn't know you want to play on the SNES, different things like that. So I was excited for the
Mm-hmm.
chance to give it a try.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. I did not play this game back in the day. I have never played Terranigma, but I have played Soul Blazer, and I thought it was good. Okay.
And
Fine.
Terranigma was never released in the US. I just checked.
No, only in we got the English version from the PAL release, is what it
hmm
seems like, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like because Enix closed at the time when there was going to be an English version released, it caused some like hiccups for the release schedule.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the game at the time of release. It was released again in 1993 slash 94 slash 95, depending on where you were in the world. And that means that it was coming into the golden age of the Super Nintendo, essentially. We had a lot of the same stuff that we talked about on the last podcast you were on. There was Secret of Mana and Romancing Saga 2 and Breath of Fire and Phantasy Star 4 and Shining Force 2 and Lufia and Shadowrun and Dragon Quest 1 and 2 and et cetera, et cetera. Lots of games coming out. The next year we had Final Fantasy 6 and then Chrono Trigger and Earthbound all in these couple of years. So this was coming into a really hoppin' time on the Super Nintendo. Did you play a lot of games this time? I don't think you did, but I could be wrong. Were you just
No,
on computer?
yeah, I was definitely more of a PC gamer during this era. My family had an original Nintendo, and so I played like Mario, some shmups, and like some rentals on that. But we didn't have a SNES at this time, and I was definitely more of a like strategy game and like CRPG player. I also, I mean, like frankly, I probably wasn't actually playing any of that stuff at this time because I was born in '89, so I would have been pretty young. So this was a pretty
Oh,
text
right.
heavy game for me to be playing at like 5 or 6. So I was probably just playing like Mario and those games that were like very like text low games or playing them like on parents' laps on the PC. But this era of games is definitely more PC related for me. Like those were the games I
Right.
remember from this era.
And then the sort of late 90s CRPGs really landed when you were getting ready for that sort of game, I bet.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, like, I played a lot of the different, like, Dungeons and Dragons tie-in titles. A lot of the ones that actually came before Baldur's Gate, ironically, which is, I think, where a lot of people think those D&D tie-ins started. But I played um, Dark Sun, Might and Magic, a little bit of Baldur's Gate. But I played more Icewind Dale, and then like later in the like into the 2000s, I played like Neverwinter Nights and stuff. But I was definitely more into CRPGs a year or two after this was done.
Got it. Well, you missed a hop in time
I
on
really
the
did.
Super Nintendo. And so did I mostly. As I said in previous episodes, I really did not play a ton of those games at the time when they came out, mostly because of, the ability to acquire them. I was not working and buying video games yet, and my parents were doing what they could. So I got my few games, I rented a bunch of games, and I was focused more on maybe different genres, I think, at the time.
Yeah, I think this was very much the era where my parents too, like consoles weren't an RPG system in like my family's mind. Like that's what you played, like quick kind of like you're playing for 15-minute burst kind of things. And if you were playing something
Hmm.
longer, that's what the PC was for. Because like my dad had longer games on the PC, and like that's what he was keeping on his eye out for. But I don't think, even though my parents probably would have liked games like this, other than the original Zelda, I don't think they had anything that had a save function on a console game until I had Pokemon on the Game Boy.
Hmm. Yeah, well, a lot of people were making a lot of good stuff, and the people making this game were notable in that the director, Masaya Hashimoto, and the designer, Tomoyoshi Miyazaki, were involved in almost all of those quintet titles that I had mentioned earlier. Miyazaki, the designer here, did most of the writing on all those other games with Hashimoto as the director. And on Terranigma, which followed, the designer Miyazaki was the director of that game with Hashimoto moving to producer. So these folks were the core here of the leadership at Quintet all the way through all those games that people loved. And for this game in particular, Mariko Ohara was brought on for writing for this game because she is a Japanese science fiction novelist. And she contributed to only this game of all of those, which is interesting
Interesting.
because the story goes all over the place. Um, Development, we're not going to talk about it, but there were some changes made from the Japanese version to the USA version. One, it had a darker story originally. So maybe a lot of what we saw was not exactly as it was supposed to be. I'm not sure. I didn't really get that much into it. But it was mentioned that it was more overt about cannibalism. The school that Will began the game in was actually a church, and the priest led him in a prayer at the beginning, and the statue on the roof was a cross. Um, the character Seth turned into a Leviathan, not a Riverson, whatever that is. And at the end of the game, Kara and Will talk about what it must feel like to be God when they were looking down from where they were. There was also a different boss in the Sky Garden area. It was a bird, whereas in the American version, and this may be one of the changes that was actually positive, it was turned into that kind of like flying statue thing. And that was supposed to more closely resemble an element of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. So they made that change. There was also a version in between. There was a prototype version. The ROM actually was leaked in the early 90s. It had a different title and a different title screen. It was called Soul Blazer: Illusion of Gaia. And there is that direct link to Soul Blazer that I was mentioning earlier. It also kept a couple of the Japanese character names, Tim instead of Will, Karen instead of Kara, and there were some variations in the script, which I don't know exactly, but some of the characters were made more dark and sinister, one example being the jeweler gem. And Nintendo was not credited on that version. It must have been before they picked it up for publication in the US. But when they did, the title screen was changed to what it is now to more resemble that Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past screen, which I think is funny.
That is, yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah. No ports, no remakes. They've never gone back, never touched it again. But it was received pretty well. We have an 80% aggregate score at game rankings with a bunch of 90s out of 100s, 8 out of 10, 7 out of 10, 82%, 90%, 86%. We know how averages work. It got an average of 80.17. Except Nintendo Power only gave it a 3.675, whatever that math would come out to be, out of 5. Which you would think it's their published game. They would give it a 5 out of 5, because that's how
Yeah, them
Nintendo Power
giving the
was.
lowest ranking is fascinating.
It's funny, yeah. In 1995, Total rated this game 41st in their top 100 SNES games, and it became the 186th best game made on a Nintendo system in Nintendo Power's top 200 games list in 2006. So that's on any Nintendo system. In
Wow.
2011, IGN ranked Illusion of Gaia 74th on their top 100 SNES games of all time. And in 2018, wow, we're getting pretty modern here. Complex ranked Illusion of Gaia 86th on their best Super Nintendo games of all time. Huh. That's a range. I like the 186th on all Nintendo systems in 2006. That was after the GameCube was out and maybe
Well,
right when the Wii released, I
I was gonna
suppose,
say we're into DS also, so I'm
and the
sure that
DS.
also like contains handheld stuff. So we have Game Boy, GBA, and I mean like I'm a huge GBA fan, and so like there's some heavy hitters because 186 does not sound great until you're like, oh, that's all games up to that point by Nintendo in 2006. That's pretty impressive.
On a Nintendo system, not necessarily just by Nintendo, but on
Right,
their
right,
system.
right.
So yeah, yeah, it's interesting to go from that 3.675 to putting it on that list. Anyway, that's what they all thought about it. But what do we think about it? Because we played it. All right, Jake. So, did you play this in handheld mode or did you play it on a big screen?
You
Inquiring
know I played
minds,
it in
i.e.,
handheld.
mine. Damn
I was
it.
playing it on my Miu, on the go, lunch breaks, 15 minutes here and there, and then some longer sessions, using my little 3D printed grip to like make it a little bit more holdable. But yeah, I played it entirely handheld.
Okay, I played mine actually a little bit on the Miu as well, but then after about half the game, I switched. I saved my SRAM file, transferred it over to my computer, and played it on the big screen for the rest of the time. And at that point, I got much more into it. But
Nice.
I want to know what struck you early on. What would be the first thing that kind of caught your attention about this game when you fired it up?
It looks fantastic. Um,
I thought so too.
yeah, the graphics and the art design are incredibly sharp. Like I would say this rivals anything I've played on the console. I think this looks better than Final Fantasy VI often does, and I love Final Fantasy VI. Um,
Mm.
like I think like visuals, there's a coherent design kind of look that's going on. The sprite work for the protagonist and like his gang of friends and the enemies and everything like all looks really really good, and even the animation work for the attacks and whatnot all look really really good.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. This was a couple years after Zelda, and I feel like they really wanted to do that sort of Zelda-like game,
Mm-hmm.
and they focused real hard on making it look fantastic. And it's like brighter, more colorful. You even see, you said animations, like there are the animations of the character moving, doing his attacks and slides and whatever. And there's also they use the animations of his hair getting blown by wind a few times. They use the
Mm-hmm.
animations of flames on the walls being blown by wind. I like that they do that. It's cool that it's sort of a comprehensive visual presentation that is not just to look at, but also gives you gameplay information on multiple occasions throughout the game. Super cool.
And there's some like they're basically cutscenes. I mean, that's what they are, is like story beats that you are watching things happen, and the game tries very hard to make lots of those beats delivered in visuals rather than just purely text. Which I
Hmm.
think was a very bold and interesting choice, and they clearly put a lot of thought into how they wanted it to look.
Yeah. Yeah, they did a lot of interesting things with kind of scene setting in this game also. But let's take a step back toward the beginning and kind of lay it out a little bit more, beyond what we did in our overview. So
Hmm.
tell me a little bit about how the game is structured, laid out, what we're actually doing.
Yeah, so you start off and you have what feels like a very common kind of setup for a a console JRPG of this time. Of you have a main character who's designed very well, and you kind of walk around and you immediately have to start interacting with the people around you. Um, but you get kind of a little bit of a cutscene. Actually, now I'm remembering. It's been a while since I started the game, but you get a cutscene in the beginning that a group of adventurers went to the Tower of Babel, and all of them
Hmm.
disappeared slash perished, minus one survivor that is your main character. And your main character has like returned to his hometown, but doesn't remember anything that happened in the tower. And then the game starts, and you're sort of exploring this town as you're talking with your friends and sort of getting to learn a little bit more about the setting.
Yeah. And the setting it's weird. It's kind of set in like an age of exploration,
Hmm.
but geologically, the overworld map looks like the Earth looked billions of years ago,
Yes.
uh, which is funny. But you're ultimately going to be going to real world locations in Illusion of Gaia, and they're very particular ones. They're kind of like wonders of the world. You go to the pyramids, you go to the Great Wall of China, you go to Angkor Wat, you go to the Nazca lines, you go to other places like this. You get
You
on
investigate
an
like
Incan ship.
Incan people, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, so it's meant to be in the real world, and the story, which kind of sets the stage, is as you said, you were at the Tower of Babel. Your father was there. He was one of the people who was lost also. And there's something going on with some comet, and it's not explicit like what the consequences are necessarily going to be, but it does have an effect on the people of the earth, and maybe when it gets here or close by, it's going to do something, but that something is explicitly not crashing into the planet and destroying it. It's more mystical in a way, or magical, or manipulative, is what it seems. Is that kind of the vibe you got?
I have to be 100% honest that some chunks of this story, I was like, I have no clue what is happening right now or why this is happening. And I think the comet was one of those things where it's like, okay, something with a comet's going to happen. It definitely doesn't give the vibe that's going to destroy things, but that's about as
Right.
specific as I felt like I understood. So I'll take your word that it's more mystical. That fits the vibe of the rest of the game, and that makes sense.
Yeah, it felt more like a corrupting force than a
Yes.
destructive force to me. And I even wrote down in my notes, I didn't really follow the beginning.
Okay, cool.
Uh, but the manual does have an intro that you can read, and I probably forgot about it already because I read it early on. But it's a, good 4-page intro. The nameless ancients used their knowledge to create new forms of plants and animals that would make life better on Earth. beasts, war, terrorized people, civilization crumbled, knights, light and darkness, ultimate weapon, comet, destroyed that race, mutated people, deepest recesses of the world, Egyptians, Babylonians, every 800 years, comet return, blah, blah, blah. Our story begins the age of exploration. Okay, so this comet is cyclical and it's going to do it again. It's going to warp and change and or destroy civilization.
And
Okay.
the kickoff is interesting for this because you are a character who I think is pretty explicitly like a tween, right? Like
Yeah.
vibe I get is that you and your friend group are like maybe 12 or 13, which felt younger than maybe some of the protagonists that like I've played JRPGs with. Not all of them. It felt very like Grandia, like if anybody's played that, where like
Mm-hmm.
your characters are younger, the tone feels younger, and like your friend group references that you have this like weird power, and so your main character has a flute, and when they spin this flute, for some unknown reason, which I'm sure you find out later that I actually didn't 100% get to, or if I did, I didn't understand it, you can move certain stones that are tied, I believe, to the Incan people. And like with almost like telekinesis, pull them towards you, which is used in
Yeah.
puzzles in the later part of the game. So it's sort of introducing an important mechanic of will your main character, when Will is like exploring, keep an eye out for stones that look like this and hold the button to scoot them around to open up new paths.
Right. Yeah. So Will is kind of, he's got powers. He's different. He's a different person. He's like the chosen one. He, I think, is kind of what he's like an evolved human. He's like what
Mm,
people should be, or something relating to the changes that people go through in relation to this comet, this cycle, and new civilizations and new peoples of the world. Um, but it's not super clear. Even I finished the game. How far did you get?
um, I got partway through the palace. I believe it's called the Sky Palace or the Air Palace. After
Mm,
you have discovered the golden ship, the
right.
palace,
The
like the
Sky
dungeon
Garden.
immediately after that, which I think is like it's like in the first third of the game, but nearing the end of that first third, based on the walkthrough I was using.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, looking at this walkthrough, it's kind of placed right in the middle, so it's not too far off halfway,
Okay.
it seems. The Sky Garden, where you had to go into like four different distinct segments of it, and you go upside down and stuff.
Yes, and I have talked about this, I think, on the previous episode I was on. I'm not great at puzzle games, and the mechanics in the Sky Garden may or may not have contributed to why I didn't get further.
Oh, yes. And you know what? That's kind of something that I wanted to talk about was the way that this game is not like it doesn't really have Zelda puzzle vibes.
hmm
It has its own sort of, it's a kind of just a puzzly game, and I think it's often spatial.
Yeah, and as you play, you sort of your main character Will gets new abilities to like navigate puzzles in different ways, which was
Mm-hmm.
interesting. But even the combat has a very puzzle sort of element to it, and you warned me about this, and so I was prepared going into the game. But in practice, it's very different. Where you have stats in the game that are important to level up because you don't actually have a level, and it's we talked about earlier. It's health, defense, and attack, right?
Right.
But in order to get stat boost, you need to defeat every enemy in a section of the map. And early on, this is pretty easy. It's just like clearing the map, easy, boom, get your stat boost. But as the game progresses, they start shoving enemies into corners that are hard to find or hard to fit in. You have to attack it from a specific angle or with a specific type of attack, otherwise it doesn't work. And so there's a
Right.
puzzle element to this combat because It's not about defeating the monster to progress, it's because you want that stat boost and you really truthfully need it. And the game warns you in the manual, like, defeat every monster you can because you're going to need these level ups. And so there's like an additional, not only are you using puzzles to navigate through the dungeon itself, but the very act of fighting monsters often feels like it turns into a puzzle where you're like, oh, there's 12 people here. I've killed 10 of them. How do I get to these last two?
Yeah, absolutely. And it does sometimes require you to kill the enemies to progress because sometimes certain enemies will open up new paths forward.
Hmm.
But it hides the enemies in other ways. Like early on the areas are small and they get bigger and bigger, or the area that the monster count refers to gets larger,
Yes.
and you'll have to, because those areas are not continuous like pathing wise, you'll have to go through a door to like the area on the back or on the other side, or inside versus outside, whatever it is, and do a little bit in there, and that's a different area with a different count of monsters, and then come back into the first area in a different portion you couldn't access before, and now continue to work on the enemies in that area as you go. And it does have a lot of the kind of corridors with a bunch of different doors, or floors up and down with different stairways. And
Stairways that only lead in one area, and you need to actually take the second stairway to get to the third area to kill the monster in the fourth area. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, some of that sort of thing. I actually liked the Sky Garden because it wasn't about the doors and like choosing door A, B, or C. And I liked that earlier one, the Diamond Mine. That was a little bit more straightforward.
Yeah, I did like the
Um,
diamond mine.
but there was one that you probably didn't get to. Actually, two that you didn't get to that I did not love. The Seaside Palace was right after the Sky Garden, and I got stuck there for a really long time because I kept falling asleep. I would play the game super late. I had a lot going on in my life, and I would try like late at night to play the game, and I would walk around a little bit, fall asleep, and then I'd be like, I don't know what I did. And I would keep
Right.
doing it, and I ended up missing something early on that was an absolute necessity. It was a trigger. You had to talk to a specific character who was part of your party,
Oh.
and she would come along with you. And only if she was with you when you got to a room with a particular element of the surroundings, she would come out and say, oh, this, blah, blah, blah. And then you could interact with it, which would then trigger the next thing where you find the key for over here. So without that first step, I was just walking around. I walked around the entire place. I killed all the enemies and everything. And I was like, I don't know what to do. So I almost tumbled right out of this game at that point. But I caught my last little fingertip on the cliff of giving up there. But I want to get back to the leveling system, because that is actually something that I really like about this game. Not because it's great in the sense of character building or what you would expect from an RPG, but actually because it's the opposite of that. It's very simple.
Yes.
All you have to do is find all the enemies and kill them, and you'll get your improvements. And I think that's pretty cool.
I liked it a lot in theory. I think it's a cool attempt to work a leveling system in without having an actual experience counter or whatever. Um, I really want it, instead of it assigning a point to whatever predetermined thing happens, and I couldn't quite figure out if certain rooms boosted certain
Hmm.
stats or if there's a rotation you're on or what.
It was exactly, each area had exactly the one that they wanted it to have every time you play the game.
I really wish it was just a point, like you have a point, assign it how you want, and I think that would have given a really fascinating and
Oh yeah.
kind of interesting dynamic where you as the character, like you as the player, get to decide, oh, maybe I'm going to really overemphasize attack power and be a real glass cannon, or overemphasize HP or whatever. Because there's only three stats, it's not that
They could
much.
have definitely done that. Yeah, just when you get to the maximum of one stat, you can't put any more in it. Now you have to
Right.
go do the other ones.
And I think that would have given some much needed choice and player
Mm-hmm.
not motivation, but like player ability to decide how they're navigating this game, because I think one of the interesting things the game tries is you have a number of different ways you're navigating the levels, but after a while I really felt some repetition in the way I was doing things. And I really think having that sort of carrot of, if I clear this, I can put another point into attack, and maybe I'll be able to kill this monster in one more hit, would have really pushed me a little bit more. Whereas because I didn't know what stat it was going to boost, often it was like, well, it'd be great to get this. I'm going to push to it, but it might be defense or HP, which I don't actually care about right now, or vice versa.
I felt like early on I always wanted it to be, or not always, but like I wanted it to be attack early on. And then
Hmm.
later in the game, every time I was about to clear an area, I was thinking, please let it be a hit point one. Please let it be a hit point one. Because, like, you don't heal in this
No.
game very much. You go to the save room, which is like this door that shows up random. It's like a save point in any other RPG, except it's a door, and you walk in and you talk to Gaia and you get your health back and you get your journey recorded and you can switch into your alter egos. We'll talk about it in a second. And otherwise, there are like 13 or 12 or 13, I think. Maybe it's 12. 12 healing items in the entire game.
Only
So
12?
you can't. Yeah, that's what I read.
I mean, that fits because I was definitely feeling the pinch of like, where are the more of these healing items? Yeah, I mean, that is another thing that I think the game tried to address by having, you have these like red, they're not red orbs. You have like these points that you gather when you kill just every monster, and once you reach 100 you get a respawn.
Oh yeah. I
But you
still am
don't
not sure how that.
Yeah, but you don't respawn like in a you don't like immediate. It would be super helpful if you just popped up at full health when you got downed, but instead you respawn at like the beginning of the dungeon. And so often the lost progress was like, even though you technically killed everything up to that point, it was like, I don't want to navigate back to here again, and I still have not full health, and there's no healing items. So like, it felt helpful for things like boss fights or like certain tough areas, but for the most part, I would just save state if I got downed. I was like, nope, I'm save stating. This isn't
Hmm.
how I want to go.
Yeah, I used a bunch of save states, but I also felt like I was paying attention to the SRAM saves, to the actual game saves, and
Hmm.
I used those for a little bit. And actually, that kind of helped me move my game over, and it helped me when my save state got screwed up too. I was like, okay, I'll use the
Mm.
SRAM and it'll be fine. But I think the saving probably would have felt fine to me if I played it back in the day. Maybe a little less so now because we're kind of trained to be able to save wherever we want. We're
Right.
spoiled. But I didn't think that was too bad.
I wish there was another healing method.
Yeah, there should be another healing method. I mean, 13 times. It's interesting. But that's how games were, right? They were
Hmm.
hard. If you died, you reload your save if you wanted to. And you could even do that, like, if you got killed or if you screwed something up, just turn the game off, reload the save. I did that hundreds of times with 7th Saga back in the day. So I would probably do the same with this.
Yeah, I can only
Um,
imagine with Seven Saga.
oh God. That was a tough time. But this system, I think, is part of a larger theme in that they were trying to make a very directed and controlled experience.
Hmm.
They wanted you to be leveled exactly to the point that they wanted you at every step of the way. They wanted to show you scenes that they wanted to lock you into. You sometimes had to just like hang around and watch. They wanted to usher you from place to place. There's no overworld on this game. You'll finish an area and then you'll have a little conversation with your party, and they say, okay, let's go to the next town. And then it goes to the overworld map. It gives you a little bit of mode 7, and it just runs you on a rail along the map to the next area. It doesn't even need a map. The map is simply there to give you a sense of place and make you feel like you're in the world. It's not there to actually function, right? Did that strike you as odd, the way that they just ushered you from place to place, or did you kind of like feel it made sense with this authored experience they were building for us?
I kind of liked it. I think it felt, the game opens up talking about we're in the age of exploration, right? Um, and I feel like
Yeah.
having a map to give a sense of place and a like almost like a sense of scope of what's happening was important to show, you're traveling around this area pretty extensively. Um, but I really don't love wandering around on an overworld map and not knowing where to go. So the part of me that likes a linear story experience appreciate it just being like, yeah, let's just get us to the next area. Cool, it's over there. So I liked it, and visually I think it like really worked for the themes they're trying to play with.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, I thought that too. I felt like the map, even though it felt odd at first
Mhm.
to not be, because it was different from what we're used to, maybe.
Right, I mean it's
I was like,
completely
oh,
different.
I don't get to do anything here. This is just an in between. But I also, like you said, felt like it gave me an understanding of the journey and kind of the story a little bit, maybe. I don't know. Um, there's just one more thing I wanted to mention in relation to this system before we move on to another big part of the game, is that in order to manage this whole system of leveling up and clearing your areas, there are two pause screens. One is for your inventory, which is kind of awkward to use, and the other is for like a very vague map that shows icons for roughly the direction and distance of enemies on the map, and then there's a counter for how many enemies are in that area, and a counter for how many treasure chests there are. And once I realized this, after again consulting the manual, I found I was in that screen constantly, like making sure, okay, got to go over here. Okay, maybe not this door. Maybe this door will get me, or maybe this path will get me in the direction of those enemies, or that chest, or that dark space, which is what the save area is called. Did you find that too? Were you in there all the time?
I definitely was referencing it a lot. I don't think I was looking so much as what direction things were, so much as like, okay, how many enemies are there? But it's a very useful tool. And when there'd only be like one or two left, I'd use it to be like, okay, which way are we going to find these ones out?
Yeah, so I think it was nice though. Yeah, it was nice
Yes.
to have, especially with that system, because otherwise I would have been lost.
I mean, you would never have known how many were left, right? Like, particularly with
Yeah,
how widespread some of these enemies could be.
it would have been a nightmare. That was an indispensable part and definitely made it like reasonable to even have that system in the first place. And I
Hmm.
think it's important that people know that.
The inventory system is very clunky, though. I mean, like, you're 100% right that, like, you basically go in and select what item you want tied to your B button, and then most of them are one use only, but some of them you need to give to NPCs, and then there's some you have a limited amount of things you can carry, and then there's some gems that when you use them they transport to a merchant of some sort that you might be able to eventually cash in, but I never found said merchant. So like the inventory system's just weird, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. You never found the jeweler,
No.
the red jewel guy?
Mm-mm.
He's in basically every town, but he looks different in every town. He's like
Okay.
got a different sprite because he takes the form of different people, and he'll give you stat boosts, and he gives you a new power, like an upgrade to one of your powers, and if you get all of the gems in the game, you even get access to a secret dungeon at the end of the
Mm.
game with a boss character from Soul Blazer, from the first boss of Soul Blazer.
That's pretty cool.
Um, so that's another connection to that game. I don't know what happens there because I did not get all the red jewels because
Fair.
I don't play in a completionist sort of way. And actually, this game is kind of notorious for having missable items, mostly those red gems. If you leave an area that had one, a lot of times you're not going to get a chance to go back. And I think people complain about that a lot, but if you're not that kind of player, don't worry about it. If you are, use a walkthrough
Yeah,
before
pretty
you
much.
leave an area. Check your walkthrough and see, like, are there any red gems here? There might be some help with the red gems in the book, also in the manual, because it basically has a mini strategy guide
Hmm.
inside the game manual. It has all of the areas from beginning to end. So really, it's a self-contained product that you can get through that way if you need to without any external data.
I think they knew they were designing something challenging, and they're like, let us give, I don't know, some help to the players so they don't
Yeah.
absolutely lose their minds trying to play this, which, like, I can respect.
Yeah. Okay, now the other main mechanic that we haven't really mentioned that Jake actually tried to mention, but I said, wait, let's finish this little bit, is what is it, Jake?
It's this transformation system. So early in the game, you unlock the ability at a save point to interact with a statue that is like to the left of your main save point in this sort of portal dimension. And when you do, you
Yeah.
transform into this knight. What's the knight's name? I can't remember.
I think it's Freedon.
Yeah, that sounds right. But you're basically it's your combat form. And so your main character, is useful for puzzle-based exploring, some basic attacks, has most of your things to navigate, like getting through different parts of dungeons. But the knight form does significantly more damage. I think
Mm-hmm.
has better defense and eventually gets the a range attack, which is pretty useful.
Yeah.
Whereas Will is just hitting people with his flute, which is not very effective. And the sword that your knight has a much better reach, and so it's super useful. And there's a second form that I didn't get to experience, but I'd love to hear you talk about, Eddie.
So the third form altogether is called Shadow, and you only get it toward the very end of the game, the second to last area, the pyramid, and it's very strong, and it can kind of liquefy and go down through the ground at certain
Mm.
graphically signaled areas to add a new dimension to how you navigate space. And I found that kind of interesting and fun to use. And the character was really strong, so that was cool. But so was Friedan. And for Friedan, it says transform into Friedan when faced with many enemies. His long sword allows him to reach things you can't, as Will. Friedan can also use dark powers, Will cannot. And I feel like the three of these characters play together in another sort of puzzly way because the environments that you navigate, you'll need to, at one point, have a sword that can reach a little extra further to hit a
Mm-hmm.
button. So you need Freedan. But then you may need to use the Psycho slide that Will gets to slide under, like through a hole in the wall, or his spin dash to go up a steep ramp or something. And they often do it in such a way that you'll be playing as Will, you'll switch to one of these others and use their abilities to do things until you get to a point where you have to switch back to Will to kind of go through one of the things that only Will can manage, and then do a little bit more as him. And then if you want, switch back later to handle enemies a little bit easier, etc. So back and forth between characters becomes another way of navigating these kind of puzzle spaces. Shadow is definitely cool though. Shadow's cool. I liked using Shadow. Made the end of the game easy.
In the part of the game I was in, and it's good to hear that they sort of, I think, play around with us a little bit more as the game goes on. you sort of like know you have to transform when it's there, and then it sort of takes away the transformation, or when you then hit the next save point, often it's like, well, I have to transform back to Will because it you don't have the amount of abilities that it sounds like after the point I was at you get, and so it sort of felt less like, oh, which of these do I use, and it was early on, it's more if you can transform into Freedon, you're like, well, I definitely need to be him. And then if it's taken away, it'll be like, oh, well, obviously now I need to be Will. But it's good to hear that's the game training you to figure out how to process that when the dungeons get harder, rather than just the game holding your hand that way the whole time. Because this is one of the, I think, interesting
Right.
design choices they made.
Yeah, it did become more integrated fully as the game went on. So that was a good thing that happened later. Unfortunately, I guess it took too long for you to really be able to enjoy that.
Yeah, it does take a while.
Now, the other thing that's important in this game that I mean, we talked about it a little bit, but this story is so odd,
hmm
but it's not the overall story that is really important, like the arc of it, but more the themes in this game.
Yes.
And I think a lot of it is essentially, to boil it down, talking about how bad humanity can be. It uses particular examples of killing animals when you maybe don't need to, or engaging in slave trade if your company is Rolex, Roleks, in the city of Euro, with these characters coming from kind of more Asian inspired origins.
Pretty early on, there's a corrupt, king that is basically bad enough that his daughter, the princess, wants to like escape from him.
Yes, she's basically held in a prison of silk and something, she says, something like
hmm
that, where she's just this princess who's forced to live her imprisoned life as a princess because that's her role in life. And also at the King Edward's castle, they talk about these tapestries or rugs or something that take 40 years to create. And then later, you go to the town or the village where they make these things, and you see children born into working,
Mm,
laboring over these rugs for their entire lives. And then later you meet people who get sold into to essentially slavery, indentured servitude, and you find a secret kind of prison room below a shrine in, as I said, that company's the owner's house, where there are just people chained up inside there, and there are numerous times in the game where there are just skeletons laying on the ground as if people had just died just existing in this hell that they live in. And that is bold.
hmm
And I like it. I think that's great. I mean, it would be uncomfortable. I'm 41 years old now. I was a child then. I don't know. I don't know how much of it would land or how it would feel at that age, but I'm certain it would be powerful. And I like that they added that in.
I do think the moment to moment storytelling feels less like a cohesive story and more like a series of vignettes that are loosely tied together by the same cast
Like
being part of it.
parables.
It
Yeah.
feels like the difference between like I don't know if you've ever read the Witcher books, but like the first two Witcher books are short stories that just have Geralt in them, and they deal with some similar themes.
Mhm.
Usually, they're set in similar settings, but they're like short stories interconnected only because the main characters in each of them. And the later ones are actual novels with like cohesive plots that link together and different things. And this felt like playing through a series of short stories that just happen to involve the main character that are like vaguely related, but only in the most vague ways.
Yeah, I get that. I felt that it was kind of disjointed. It like didn't it didn't feel like it had. It's kind of like the Super Mario Galaxy movie I just saw recently, where it was a story and there were things thrown in and it was enjoyable, but like, wait, where were we? I had a lot of the sort of like, oh, where were we kind of thought. It's less as you go on in this game. Like it kind of comes together more,
Gotcha.
but it still maintains that sense of like this could have been a little bit more narratively focused and narratively pointed in a particular direction.
There's also some really weird moments in both the gameplay and the story that, like, at least at the part I got to, never felt addressed. You just kind of had to be like, okay, maybe it'll explain that, maybe it won't. And like, I mean, the most notable one is Will's transforming. Like, you walk into a save point, the statue's kind of talking to you. I'm like, well, that's weird, but you're my save point, so I'm gonna go to that. And when you can transform, you're like, why can I transform? Oh, whatever, I'll figure it out, whatever. And I think it like vaguely says like you know, I think like something like your heritage or your background can do it. And then you have like moments of characters like alluding to deeper things, or like there's a whole moment on the Incan ship where like Will seems to be viewing the past and then wake up in the present and everyone's like desiccated skeletons, which was really cool. But I was like, what is happening? There's a lot of moments of that of like,
Dude,
that's really cool. What does
I
this
have no
mean?
idea what happened on the ship. Still, like I didn't
Okay.
look into it, but I did that part and I was like, wait, what just happened? Because
Hmm.
it felt like, oh, it was gonna resolve, but then you just like something happened. You like got off the ship, or the ship got hit by something and you lost consciousness and woke up in a town nearby, and it was like, okay, well that happened, I guess.
You get shipwrecked and are
I sh-
floating on like a raft with the
oh, that's
princess
right.
for like 2 weeks, and you have a fishing mini game so that you can eat. And initially, she's like, "I don't eat animals," and then eventually, she's like,
Yeah,
"Well, I'm dying, so I have to eat the animals," which is like a
right.
fascinating moment of like what is. And then everyone's fine after the like shipwreck. All your friends escaped somehow too. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like that chunk was definitely a part where they were just like wildly going from thing to thing. And they said, well, I guess a shipwreck here can
Hmm.
explain that. I don't know. Yeah, but I mean ultimately I did like a lot of what happened, here and there in the story, even if it did have that kind of disjointed feeling. And in the end, I'm not 100% sure, but I think it was explained that like Will, I don't know if it really explained the transformations. It just said that he was like a special person. Yeah, I don't know.
They're just like, it's cool,
Maybe it did.
guys. This is a cool thing. Just let it happen. And like, I'd be like, okay.
Yeah. He imagines himself as a big beefy guy. Maybe it's that. I don't know. What else? Is there anything else that you feel really stood out?
The boss fights, specifically
Oh, the boss fights.
the
Yes.
first
The first
main.
boss.
Oh my god. So this game has a number of moments that I think almost caused me to like rage quit it. And I never at any point fully rage quit it, even though I said I sort of got lost in the Sky Garden, but it was partially lost, partially like distracted by other games, partially like I don't have enough time to get to where much further than this anyway. The first boss though, I texted you and I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to beat this. Like it felt like such a challenge. I looked up guides on how to like fight it, and then even with the guide and using like kind of blind spots this boss has, it still took me like probably 20 tries. The first boss is this giant like demon head, and
Mm-hmm.
in order to you can only hit it when its eyes are glowing, and its eyes are glowing right before it starts shooting out projectiles, and one of the projectiles bounces around the room, and then there's like lasers that fly around, and I was so frustrated because you only have your basic attack with your knight character,
It
so you
was
have
like
a
a bullet hell.
yes, it felt like that. I was like, why is this the first boss? Like,
That's the hardest boss in the game, in my opinion.
You have no
It's
healing
crazy.
items, because up to that point I was using healing items when I was low on health, because I thought like every RPG in the world there'd be plentiful healing items. By the time I figured out there
Oh
weren't, I was
man.
down to one healing item at that fight. Like, it was such a
Yeah.
hard
And by the
fight.
time I got to that fight, I had not realized yet because I did not think to read the manual until after this point that you I didn't realize you had to kill all the enemies to get your level ups.
Oof.
So I had basically no level ups. I completely missed any level ups available in Edward Castle. And then after dying tons of times to this first boss, I backtracked through the what is it, the diamond mines, and got a couple of upgrades from there because I was able to start back at the beginning, and only then was I able to beat that boss using save states. But that was crazy. He has his little hands that come up, and you have to
Mm-hmm.
hit each one of those. But if you're in the front, there's a thing that's going across horizontally that you can only dodge if you're at the very bottom pixel of that area. And as you said, the ones bouncing around and the laser beams that come straight out of his face.
And you have
It's
to hit the
wild.
hands a certain amount of times to get them to let go, that then the eyes will glow
Yeah.
so you can hit it. If you like Google search like first boss of Illusion of Gaia, there's just several Reddit threads of like, is it worth playing through this? Like, this is painful, which made me feel better because like I'm not amazing at active combat games like this. Like, and by I'm not amazing, I mean I'm quite
hmm
bad at them. And I was struggling hard, and I was like, I don't know if I can do this. I did eventually beat it. The boss design itself is very cool. It's a very cool looking, well, like everything visually in this game. It looks amazing, but by the time I finally beat it, I was like, I never want to look at this little stupid boss ever again.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. And then what are the other bosses? There's the pair of vampires. I don't know if no, you didn't even get to those. There's one before that. What is the one before that?
I'm going.
Oh,
I
that one
think
you didn't get to
vampires
either. That
might be
was the
the
Sky
next one.
Garden.
Oh, is there one
No,
in the
there's the
Sky
Sky
Garden?
Garden one. Yeah, so the Sky Garden's actually only the second boss.
Right.
And that's the flying kind of statue bird guardian thing. And that's pretty cool. I like that one. After that one, you have a cool moment where you fall out of the Sky Garden and your friend has to catch you on an airplane. So there's a lot of like interesting action segments like that. When you fight these two vampires, it's with a countdown timer connected to a bomb that your friend is has strapped to him. So you have to
Huh.
beat these two vampires and then run over to the back of your friend, and it says which wire will you cut, red or blue, or whatever it is, and I just chose one of them. It doesn't matter, but it's like it's terrifying. And first you're like the red one, and then I read it's like, oh, it doesn't matter. Then there's another boss that it's like a sandworm kind of boss, and it dives underground and shoots up through the ceiling and then jumps across the screen a few times, and you have to hit it as it's in the air and not in the ground, and it spits little things out that come and get you, and you have to kill those. Then there's the mummy queen.
She looks just like Cleopatra. She doesn't look like a mummy at all.
Yeah, she's
Like,
not a mummy at all. She's not covered in toilet paper. She's just a lady. I think she has like blue skin or something. And that one's tough because she like shoots a lot of magic all around the area, and you have to dodge it by going up. Like you use these teleporters to go up to the top level, and then you can jump down, and you're avoiding things. And then at the end of the game, you fight the comet,
hmm.
which is an interesting sentence.
Hmm.
But I think I liked the bosses actually, except for that one, Castroth.
Yes.
And even the idea of it, like I like the style of it. It was just a little too hard. Like it did too much damage to me, or I didn't do enough.
All they need to do is remove, I think, the bouncing attack. And I was like, if they do this, this would be a good first boss fight. It's tough, but doesn't feel impossible. Um, Yeah, I think I agree. I think the
Yeah.
idea and design and the way you have to fight that first boss is interesting. So it's cool to hear that you like the other bosses. I was a little
Yeah.
worried that they'd get harder from there because I was like, if they get harder from here, I can't. This is going to be a real me playing Dark Souls moment of like, all right, guys, I'm out. Like,
Yeah. All the rest were super easy, to be honest. You have to actually do a boss rush as the shadow character.
hmm
You do bosses 1 through 5 before you fight the main boss of the game. The I guess the two phase main boss or the two boss main boss. But the final two bosses are incredibly easy. I basically stood in one spot and spammed Shadow's attack and it was over for both of them. So that was,
hmm.
I mean, some people will hate that, but I thought that was fine. It made me feel like I achieved something by getting to the end of the game. But yeah, that first boss sucked, man. It was so
You
annoying.
really did. Really did. I know you mentioned the music.
Yeah. How did you feel about this? Because I actually have read some opinions about this since I formulated my opinion.
I think like a lot of things with this game, when I started off, I was pretty impressed. I was like, "Huh, this sounds pretty good. There's some variety between like these different scenes, these dungeons and whatnot." And I really liked the first areas, I guess soundtracks for lack of a better way to explain it.
Mm-hmm.
But then as I did the game a little bit more, I don't know if it's that I was lingering in areas longer or what, but I was less impressed with the music as the game went on, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. Because I started out thinking, oh, this sounds pretty good. And later on, I drew an arrow down my notes that says, over time, the music becomes hit and miss.
hmm
And I found that the music kind of started to stand out as being not good in a few areas because it's not really melodic. It's like
No.
they try to be very atmospheric, but it's not strong to me. And I've seen people really compliment this game for its music. I just don't agree. There's one track that I really enjoyed. I don't remember it right now, but I remember like humming along with it while I was playing. But other than that, like the majority of the kind of like dungeon exploration ones, I was just like this isn't really pleasant.
The first Towns track I remember liking. Like I would put that on like a
Yeah.
relaxing SNES music mix and happily listen to it.
Mhm.
Um
And I think that's repeated
okay,
like
that
in
makes
other
sense.
towns. Yeah.
But it makes sense like describing the others as like trying to be more atmospheric than melodic is totally what they're doing, which is odd because songs pop up during the game and your character plays a flute and it's like instead they went with like a less music version soundtrack, which was a little
Yeah.
disappointing. Like I kind of felt
Which
like
is nuts.
as it went on I started muting it and listened to other stuff.
And speaking of that flute, you play it like twice in the beginning of the game, never again, and then
hmm
once at the second to last level, just because it makes noise. For like a particular set piece, you just have to make noise.
Feels like maybe a
But
design
yeah,
element that
flute's funny.
an older draft had being more important that they then as they developed the
Maybe.
game more sort of like were like I guess throw it in at the end too. Like
Yeah, and remember the flute was a big part of Link to the Past. And this was
mm,
like aping some of the Zelda stuff. So maybe they're like, oh, let's make his weapon a flute.
yeah, they're like throw it in now. Yeah, maybe.
Something like that. Okay. If there's nothing else,
I will say, I guess like small note, a game from the 90s touching on I think people of different cultures specifically from like non-traditional western cultures I think is sometimes going to be cringe, hit or miss, problematic in different ways, and I like went in expecting the portrayal of Incans to be particularly like rough. There are some parts where I'm like, don't know about that. But for the most part, I was pleasantly surprised that like the discussion and depiction of peoples felt like it was trying to be pretty respectful in a way that I wasn't anticipating a 90s era video game.
yeah. And I think that was part of the purpose of the game because again, you didn't get into the further portions of the game, but it leaned into a lot of the explicit advocacy
Mm-hmm.
for underprivileged peoples in the world, and the like revealing the atrocities that casually happen in modern society and have happened over history. So I think they did really well.
Yeah, I mean, totally agreed, and I think that's like pretty admirable for a game from being designed in the very early 90s, right? Like that's super
Yeah.
impressive. And so I was like, this is pretty good.
Yeah. Super good. So, on that note, at the end of every episode of Smashing Bricks, we like to give our final thoughts and decide whether the game we just played was worth revisiting in 2026 and beyond, and whether we would recommend it. And if it is, and if we would, well, then it's a smash. If we wouldn't, and if it wasn't, well, it's more of a brick. So, Jake, what are your final thoughts for Illusion of Gaia, and why is it a smash or a brick?
So I think I'm in a very similar place to where I was with Secret of Mana, not Secret of Mana, Seven Saga. Sorry, this is like Secret of Mana. I was in a very similar place to where I was with Seven Saga, where there are parts of this game that I think are really fascinating, and I think any retro gamer will really enjoy experiencing, if only for the perspective on console RPGs and JRPGs. I think this game makes an amazing first impression. Like when I fired up, I was like, "Oh, this is going to be amazing! I'm going to get super invested. This is going to be like a new favorite." And I think as I continued to play, it lost some of that luster. The gameplay gets a little repetitive. I didn't mention it a ton, but like I prefer turn-based RPGs so much more than active RPGs like this, and I definitely started to feel
Mm-hmm.
like the active combat was just not my favorite thing. I already mentioned it, but like the story didn't fully work for me. It kind of felt disjointed and confusing, and at times like a fever dream. And so I think for those reasons, I think it's a brick in that I think this is a great game to play for an hour or two and then put down, but I can't recommend it as a game to try to complete the whole thing because I feel like I got the same level of enjoyment in my first completion of like the first two dungeons as I did going almost halfway through. So that's where I
Hmm.
land of it's a brick, but I do think there are good parts here and I understand why some people really like it.
Okay. So it's a brick from Jake. And from me, well, I had a great time with this game. I liked it. I liked the combat. I did have a few moments, as we said, where I thought to myself, wait a second, is this worth it? When I was not succeeding at a particular area. But I feel like that was more based on the way I was playing it and how I kind of handcuffed myself and gave myself the worst possible chance to do well on it. But after that, I got really into the game and I kind of powered through in a joyful way the latter half of the game. The back half of the game I finished very quickly, whereas the first half of the game, it took me a longer time. And I don't think the first half of the game took me a longer time because of the game. I think it took me a longer time just because of other circumstances. And then when I
Hmm.
finally had the chance to really get into it, it had me and it hooked me. And the story, again, is disjointed, but it has a lot of interesting things to say. I really like the leveling system and the idea that you have to kill all the enemies to get your level up because it makes that a fun little game in itself, for someone who likes to clean up a space. Cleaning up these enemies was a good time. So for those reasons and other stuff that we said that I was positive about, it looks beautiful. I like switching back and forth between the different characters with the different abilities, etc. I think it was a smash for me. I would say you should go play it. I think it's accessible for players now. I love the Seventh Saga, which we played you and I the last time, and I would play it now, obviously, and enjoy it. and I did enjoy it. But when I said that it would be a brick, it was because I thought that people would have a really hard time getting into it, and it would be like, geez, this guy told me to play this game, and it just crushed me. Whereas this, I think, I mean, obviously, if I recommended it to Jake, it would be exactly that sort of a response. But I think I think a lot of people will enjoy this one because of its simplicity, and stick around for the interesting trials and tribulations of Will and his crew. You'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll question your own morality, whatever. It's a smash for me. So, with that, Illusion of Gaia is a question block. So, listen to our arguments and decide for yourself whether you want to play it or not. Or if you already did play it, you know. Check in on the Discord and tell us what you think, who you agree with. So, it may or may not be worth revisiting in 2026 and beyond. Thank you, everybody, for listening and for playing along with us if you did. Tell your friends about the show. It's the best thing you could do to get more people to listen. And if you haven't yet, go to Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcasting platform and leave us a 5-star rating and review if they have them. And if I see a review, I will read it right here on a future show. You can also go above and beyond and support the show monetarily at patreon.smashingbricks.com. You can join for as little as $1 a month. You'll get some fun perks. If you join at the Fireflower tier in particular, you'll get all the bonus round episodes every month, and you'll get to add games to the Power Up Games selection repository, from which we choose our Power Up games when we do a Power Up episode. Tanuki tier patrons get handwritten notes and ongoing recognition on the show. And if you're a Starman tier patron, you get to be on the show for an episode. As always, I'd like to thank Starman level supporter Ms. Muso. Thanks, Ms. Muso. Smashing Bricks has a Discord server where you can talk about anything with other retro gamers. So head over there and chat with us. And you can find links to everything, plus Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter at links.smashingbricks.com. As for next episode, I'll be joined once again by Anthony Labella, and we will be playing Castlevania Symphony of the Night for the Sony PlayStation, which I have never played, and Jake can't believe I've never played. He said I'm in for a treat.
Oh, you're in for such a treat.
I'm excited. I'm about to start it. I actually almost started it the other night, but I fell asleep. So get your hands on a copy, play along, send in your thoughts, and join us next time on Smashing Bricks. That wraps it up for today. I'm still Eddie Inzauto. That is Jake Ciarapica. Thank you, Jake.
Thank you.
And until next time, may the nostalgia be with you.